and then we can. Okay. So one of the ways I want to start off is just to kind of frame this with respect to adult development, human development, because there's been a lot of work done on this idea of developing as we grow. And some of the earlier work I might have shared, just to frame this a little bit last time, a lot of this work was done by Piaget, Jean Piaget, back in the early part of the 20th century. And he talked about the different stages that young children go through as they grow up in their families and go through school. And for a long time, there was a sense that, when you got to adolescence, you in essence stopped growing. That in a sense, our development was arrested. And then, you're an adult and you just go through life as an adult and don't really go through a lot of changes. But really, as psychologists into the middle and later part of the 20th century really started working more and more on adult development, they started to understand that actually, after adolescence, we do grow through stages. That development is continuous from birth till when we pass away. And there are stages that are pretty distinct as we go through our adult lives. Jane Fonda actually did a TED Talk back a number of years ago in which she was reflecting on her own development. And she went through obviously a lot of different things in her life as an adult, but when she got into her mid-60s, she realized that the way she had gone through her life, she was now at a new stage. She actually referred to this as her third act. And those of us who have gone into our 60s and enter into that phase called retirement, she wanted to really reframe this whole sense of retirement. She talked about this third act. And so for her development didn't arrest. She had new things that she wanted to approach and new things she wanted to do. So again, development is continuous. We don't really stop growing. And we have the ability to use our experiences to build on the things that we've learned over time to continue to grow. So why is adult development important within the context of talking about how we develop as leaders in our classrooms or leaders in our organizations, leaders on a team? And I think it's important because what we know about adult development, and I've highlighted two of these things here, is that when we are going through our own development, we gain a kind of foresight. We gain a sense of vision, looking into the future and being able to see what's coming. And that allows us to handle the situations that come our way. In a sense, we build this capacity to see complexity and see things for what they are and understand them more deeply. And so adult development is important because in leadership, that happens. You all have probably experienced this in your work in the classrooms or in your work in your different departments. That when you're faced with a very complex situation, your ability to harvest all the things you know and bring them to bear on that situation is really an important part of the work that you do. And then we also develop some healthy perspectives about our own capacities, our own opportunities to be a problem solver, or to realize that we've come up against our own limitations and we have to kind of go out there and partner with other people to understand how to solve a problem that we're in the midst of. So these things that we know about what happens to adults as they develop are an important part that we bring into our work in organizations and how we lead in them. This is a little graphic I've assembled that I think I want to illustrate two things about adult development. One is that there's this sense that as we grow, so as we go up this axis, that let's say this is when we graduated from college, this is when we're in our first job, and this is when we're a team leader on a group. This development vertically is about our ability to go through transformations as we go from one stage to the next. This vertical development is one way in which we develop. And often the vertical development isn't something you teach someone how to do. It's something we kind of go through as a function of our life changes and the experiences we have. As the world is becoming more and more and more complex, this vertical development is really important. At any one stage of our lives, we can also develop horizontally. That is, within a stage, so if you're a team lead, you can go to a workshop and learn how to be, how to learn certain teaching techniques, or you can go and learn certain technologies that you can bring into your classroom or into the work that you do. These horizontal skills allow us to do our job better, but they aren't necessarily things that allow us to grow vertically. But both things, both horizontal development and vertical development, are both important in our work as leaders. And so we'll talk a little bit about this as we go into some of these things around our own development. So what I'd like you to do is just take a minute, and if you took the PDF of the slides, I think this is slide number 8, you could write on there, or you can just write on a piece of paper that you have, or just think about this prompt. Reflect on a situation from either the past or your current reality in which you felt your leadership changed or shifted. Something that you did really underwent you underwent some kind of transformation, some realization, and it allowed you to handle situations in a better way, in a more complex way. So think about that for a minute, and then we'll just see if some things come up for you that we can share and talk about. So this might be something like, for example, there was a part of my life when I was like this, then I was on a team and working with people, and I have a new reality, a new thing happened to me. So it could be something like that you're thinking about. Anybody have anything they want to share? Maybe a transfer. Go ahead. Is that Angela?
Yes. Hi. I think that I was a big on being a rule follower. Like I was very like rigid. I didn't adjust well to change. I hate chaos, and like that would like drive me crazy. So I feel like I've allowed myself to be more go with the flow, what's better for that situation, and not constantly look at, well, we're supposed to do A, B, C, D, but understand like, okay, it's okay not to do A in this situation. No one will be hurt. And just allow myself to go with the flow and just for the betterment of the team or for the students, and not because it's written in stone, I need to do this. So I think that's one way I've developed.
Okay. And was that a sort of a gradual shift for you, or was there something that happened that kind of clicked the light bulb on that life would be better if you approached it this way?
It was more gradual. It took time. It had to see like, okay, you're kind of doing more damage by trying to follow this rule and being so, you know, strict, and
Yeah,
it's more, the outcome will still be the same in the end if you back off a little bit and just let it happen.
yeah. Good. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else have something they want to just share? Yeah, go ahead. Trudy? Yeah.
Okay. Um, I think I always knew that people had different learning styles, but I remember watching those Sherlock Holmes movies with Robert Downey Jr. in them, and I
Uh-huh.
didn't know that other people couldn't map out the next move, like visually see it before they started. Like I knew other people learn differently, but I didn't know they process so different. I'm looking at them like, oh yeah, that's what I do, and there's like I couldn't imagine it. So that helped me to relate to my team better because here
Yeah.
I'm thinking, like, well, what did you see when you thought about the plan? What was the best case scenario? And they're just like, I don't know. And I'm just like, oh, okay, because we're processing the information completely different.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's I think when we talk with teachers a lot, that's something that happens with teachers, right? Particularly when we've gone through college and we learn a certain way, and then we have to teach, and all of a sudden we're in the presence of 18 different learners or 20 different learners, or we're on a team of adults working in our department, and we see how people learn differently, and then all of a sudden the light bulb clicks, right? That you have to approach everybody in a kind of unique way. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Anyone
Mrs.
else?
Jones, Bernetta.
Yeah,
Um,
Bernetta, go ahead.
I'm usually or typically more goal oriented and trying to achieve and get things done. So I found that during some experiences, if I just stop and take a personal interest in the person or what's going on with them,
Yeah,
they were more open to communicating or collaborating to
yeah, yeah.
get the goal or get
Hmm.
the task done.
Hmm. Yeah, and was there something in your life that kind of clicked that for you, that light bulb went on, or was that again just like it just happened and you don't necessarily can't associate it with anything in particular that you did or
I just think through different experiences and because instead of trying to just plow through and just getting it done, you may be leading, but no one's following you.
yeah, yeah,
So,
right.
so
And
you're really just
life's
plowing
a great
through.
teacher, right? I mean, those
It
life
is.
experiences really, if we think about them and reflect on them, there's a lot of there's a lot of good wisdom in that. Yeah. Good. Well, that's the point here, right? Is that we all, based on our life experiences, we all go through this and we all build these awarenesses of the world around us and how to relate to them. And we're going through this developmental process really continuously, and making either subtle shifts where it's kind of gradual, or sometimes we have this grand realization. We go through a traumatic situation, and that causes us to make a change that in our lives in ways that we're just a different person when we come out of that on the other end. So you read that article by Bill Torbert, hopefully, and seven. Yes, go ahead, Anna. Did you have something? No? Okay. So in Torbert's article, he's taking adult development and now he's bringing it into the world of leadership. And then he took this understanding of adult development, went into organizations all over the world, and he started to work with leaders and try to understand where were leaders, how were they thinking, what was their mindset, what kind of mental models did they use. And he used that to develop this stage theory that is built off of adult development work early on. And he came up with what he calls his 7 action logics. And think of an action logic as a mindset, a way of being, a way of showing up. It's somewhat discrete, but it also has some overlaps. There's a kind of continuum along these set of action logics. The opportunist, the diplomat, the expert, the achiever, redefining. In his article, he talks about redefining, this was earlier on, as the individualist. Transforming, he talked about as a strategist, and then the alchemical. So he's taking adult development and he's moving it into this world of leadership development. And you'll recognize these action logics because they're also part of the VMI that you've taken. Now, in the article, in the beginning of that article, he talks about the different stages and he defines them. And they have certain qualities or characteristics. And I sent you a PDF that is sort of a cheat sheet that describes each of the 7 action logics. But the other thing he talks about towards the end of that article, the last third, is he talks about the transformations we go through from opportunist to diplomat, from diplomat to expert. The diplomat is often somebody who's highly socialized to a group. You could think of this as say something like I'm in my church and I belong to a certain committee and I become socialized to that committee's work. The diplomat, as we go through our education and we develop more and more expertise, we get to be experts in certain things. And this is the expert action logic. And then the achiever action logic is when we are taking on more responsibility and we actually have goals and we have deadlines and we have timelines and we want to work to meet the expectations of others in our organization. And redefining is that time when we now have a lot of experience. We've gone through a lot of projects and we've done some good work. And we start to think about, well, who am I in this work? Who am I as a teacher at Drew? Who am I as a member of the human resource team? Am I feeling like my needs are being met by my work on this team or my work in this school? And we start to really think about ourselves in a new way and redefining ourselves. And then the transforming action logic is when we actually go through major changes and we can deal with the polarities and the nuances between things that we experience. So these are the different action logics. What he points out in the article is that if my mindset or my way of being, my action logic is expert, let's say I'm this scientist working for DuPont and I'm developing a new polymer and I'm the expert chemist and that's all I think about every day is how to make this polymer better. That is my center of gravity. That's how I'm thinking most of the time. But what Torbert talks about is we have the ability to use all of these different action logics as adults. We may operate here most of the time, but we can flex and move in from one action logic to the other depending upon the context we're in. I like to think of the model that comes to mind for me. The one thing that happens with this model is there's a tendency to think of these things hierarchically, like having a transforming action logic or having that as your center of gravity is better than being an expert. But one action logic is not better than the other. They're just a way of being, a way of operating. And what Suzanne Cook-Greuter says is each stage of development is important and worthy. And the metaphor that comes to mind for me are these Ukrainian nested dolls, where if you assemble them all as one doll, all the other dolls are part of that one doll. They're built into that one doll, and if you take them apart, you can see each one. And you can reassemble them and make them into, say, this one doll. But that one doll has everything that's represented by the smaller one or the smaller one as part of that doll's essence. So in the similar vein, we have all of these at our disposal. how we use them depends upon the context we're in. So let me ask you a question to reflect on for a little bit, and then we'll just open it up for a little bit of conversation. Reflect on how you see yourself today. Now, if you've taken the VMI already gives you a sense of how you've been profiled, so to speak, according to these 7 action logics. But I want to just broaden that out a little bit. And what are some ways of showing up that you want to be open to in the future? So in the chat, we talked about those different qualities of a leader. A leader is a good communicator. A leader is a good listener. What are some ways of showing up that you want to be more open to? Or what are some ways of showing up that you want to leave behind? You show up this way to a meeting and it gets in your way and you really want to leave that behind. So reflect on that for a little bit, and then let's just talk about what that means. And showing up here is like this idea of the action logic, the mindset, the mental model. Is that clear? Let's take a few minutes to just reflect on that, and then we'll just open it up and see if want to share some of our understanding. So ways of showing up that you want to grow into or open up to, or ways of showing up that you maybe want to kind of leave behind and not try to build off of.
Are you ready for us to share?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm the daughter of my parents were co-leaders. They ran a business together their whole life. They recently sold and retired. And the guys that work for my dad used to call him Captain Chaos. And he used to run, work circles around them with his phrasing. And so that's kind of ingrained in me. And so sometimes I definitely can like feel like an overproducer, but I tend to see people who I don't perceive as like working as hard as me, which is like is super unfair, right? So just because they maybe aren't working all the time or you know in the same way that I approach my job, I want to leave that behind because I feel like it creates this like block between me and my ability to relate to people. So that is something that I want to leave in the past because it's not anybody else's fault that that's how I was raised, but it also isn't mine either. I don't know how to disconnect from it, but I can't allow it to set me back, you know, as a leader in any capacity.
Right. Yeah, that's great, Jessica. That's so insightful, right? That, you know, part of who we are and how we show up is sort of in our DNA from our earlier experiences that we just, you know, we assimilate that into ourselves, right? And it's that self-awareness that, oh, showing up that way isn't really how I want to show up. Now that my experiences are broader and I see the world differently. So yeah, I like that. That's good. That's kind of the point. Good. Thank you.
Bob, I know you said initially when we looked at the chart that it's not hierarchical, but it did feel a little bit chronological in terms of like where you are in your career, right? Like as a teacher, as a first year teacher, you do a lot of development that is skills based, right? Here's how you do a lesson plan. Here's how you do an agenda. Here's how you whatever that. And then as you grow in your career, right, and move into other positions or other leadership roles, you really have to start to master the other pieces in a way that I just don't even know that when I was 21 and I started teaching that I was thinking about the work that we're talking about. Right now, in retrospect, I was like, oh, that's why I was like that my second year of teaching. Oh, that makes sense that this thing or this experience has shifted the way that I approach whatever. So some of it I feel like is very connected to work experience and things that can actually change the way that you show up as you've lived through this experience. And now we're like, well, I'm not going to do that again, or that didn't work, or this was my intent, but this was the impact. But until you go through it, you almost don't know that you would have approached it in a different way. So that was super helpful and insightful for me in going through the process.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a good point, right? I mean, it is a developmental, this model is developmental in the sense that you know, when I start my teaching, let's just build a little bit on what you said, Keisha. When I come into the second grade and I'm you know, I'm a literacy expert, I start out my teaching and I want to do that well, right? I want to bring my expertise to bear. I want my students to learn how to read and write and think and critically think. And I can live with, if I can live with that and be a great teacher for 25 years, being an expert in that work. And maybe I don't evolve my way of thinking, my action logics, my mental models at other levels because it's not called for in terms of the work I'm doing. But if in my 5th or 6th year of teaching, I have a desire to be a team lead, or I want to be a dean, or I want to go into being a principal, or I want to be the director of HR, those changes that I have to go through to take on those other roles, which might require new ways of thinking, new complexities, then I have to be prepared to evolve my thinking to become better at those. What Torbert found is that many leaders who were leading complex organizations and they were at the expert action logic, they really struggled leading that organization. They got pigeonholed and they struggled understanding the complexity of the organization. So the action logics aren't necessarily good or bad, but what's required of us, the context, as you so clearly raised, is really important as to what action logic helps us do that work that we want to do well. Any other thoughts or sharings that people have that they want to bring up?
No, I thought you were. I do have something. I think it's really interesting that in reading through just like what it means for, you know, achiever, for instance, I feel like, you know, our whole lives are sort of based on that. Like we talk about achievement in school. You know, I went through school. It's all about achievement. What have I achieved? What's my ranking? What's my percentage? And I think that is usually, you know, I grew up thinking that that was the goal for everything. It's just achieving, and like the article says, like the bottom line, and that's what matters, and that's basically all that matters. But then, you know, you get into the real world, you start working, you start leading, and you realize that there's a lot more that goes into it. And you know, I just think it's really interesting that, you know, we're trained in such a way. Our schools are, you know, raising kids basically a certain way, without kind of thinking about like leadership and what that means, and working with actual people and organizations. And you know, I think it's something that takes a long time to fully develop, but it's something that goes way beyond anything that you really learned in a classroom.
Yeah, that's so good, Alicia. Yeah, I would agree with you. That's excellent. And I think you're right. I mean, if we actually use some of this understanding in building the culture within schools and thinking about how we teach kids, we might not put as much emphasis on the achiever mentality, right? How does that achiever mentality limit someone, as opposed to expand their thinking or help them develop? Now, when you're, you know, 7, 8, 9, 12 years old, you really, you know, there's a certain amount of assimilation to the culture and doing the work and developing routines and expertise that's important. But I think your point is, if we focus on it too much, then we miss the opportunity to help someone go through some more developmental stages as they go through school, and not just a rest in this idea of how well did I do on the test, or am I a A student or a B student?
And so I'm Alicia and I are in the same room. And I just want to piggyback on something that she was talking about, and also a little bit of what Keisha mentioned about like what I was as a, you know, first year teacher versus how my teaching and leadership evolved over time. You know, when I read like Transforming and Alchemical, I feel like that's where people want, like, I want to create social change. I want to make the world better. I want to do these big things. But this is a little bit more of a roadmap for the types of mindsets that you need to develop without it being going from I'm a baby teacher for just coming out of school all the way to bam, social change. And I watched a TED Talk, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was talking about how the Generation Z is really struggling in the workplace because they say, I want to change the world when they graduate. Like they'll get a job and the interviewer will say, well, what is your goal? I want to change the world. And then 8 months later, they quit because they haven't changed the world yet. And I don't know that anyone has ever shown me anything that's this scaffolded in terms of leadership and leadership development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And which I think is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Thank you. And now let's see, you're both in the same room. Alicia, was that Alicia or was?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
Alicia, and that was Leslie.
Leslie. Okay, Leslie. Okay, great. All right, great. Thank you, everybody. And if you have some thoughts that you want to just share, throw them in the chat. That would be great. Let's just a couple more things. Let's look at this sort of graphic a little bit, because in a way it seems to me the journey each of us is on, if you're interested in your own development as a leader in the classroom, a leader in your department, if you have aspirations to take on a new position, all of those things are part of your journey, right? You're thinking about yourself with respect to some kind of maybe treasure that you're in the midst of trying to find. The treasure is realizing your full human potential in the work that you do. And I would suggest that this introduction that we're in the midst of working on collaboratively is part of that journey, trying to build some awareness of these ideas so that you can use them in your own thinking and your own contemplation about where you are in your own professional growth. What do you want out of your time as a teacher? What do you want out of your time working in the department? Or where do you want to go in your life with respect to taking all these talents and experiences you have? So in a way, this is kind of a journey that we're on, and hopefully some self-discovery will make some things clear to you as to what you want. And I think a little bit of the VMI and some of the queries that are happening in the unpacking of your results, and some of the leadership hacks that are assembled on Adeption are an opportunity for you to go through that experience and build a path along this journey to whatever it is you want out of this experience. And feel free to make that apparent to me if you want some feedback. I'm here to not only to work with you in this capacity, but as you'll see also, if you want a little bit of individual coaching or need a thought partner, I'm happy to do that with you. So let's look at the VMI. I think just about everybody has taken it. If you haven't, you still have some time, because we'll do the large group debrief of it at our next meeting. But these are the descriptions of the action logics. And in the VMI, Adeption puts these into little windows that you can open up and explore in a little bit more detail. I put this as just kind of a one pager for you so that you get a short description. What you might do, could have been something we did before you took the VMI, but you might read through each of these and just highlight statements or words that seem to describe you. So for example, the expert, interested in problem solving via data. Well, if you love data and you love to problem solve with data, then that resonates. So maybe you highlight that, and you could read through all of these, highlighting things that describe you. This is a sort of self-evaluation, and then see which of these action logics has the most highlights in it, and then kind of compare whether that fits with the VMI, the way you did your sentence completions. So this could be a little self-evaluation if you want. But Adeption says this: leaders at all levels are facing challenges they have never known before. Think of AI coming, and artificial intelligence coming on the horizon. Think of, the elections coming forward, and we've got this artificial intelligence that can create an image of President Biden saying something, and that can be put on Twitter and everybody sees it, right? Now, how do you lead when you're being put on Twitter by artificial intelligence saying something you never said? Interesting problem. So Adeption says it's no longer enough to be good at what you do or even the best. Leaders need to have a greater range of understanding, resilience, empathy, and ability to respond that enables them to adapt and lead across constantly changing situations. I love this quote because I feel like, along with many of the things you said in the chat in the beginning, good listening, good communicator, empathetic, these are qualities that we have to build on and develop if we want to lead effectively in whatever it is, whatever role we play in an organization. I thought of this when I read that quote. I thought of this situation with Nelson Mandela back when he was out of prison. He had just been elected to his new office as president of South Africa, and he was one of these people who was magnanimous in so many ways. He was just this stellar, sort of very thoughtful leader. And so he goes to this rugby match. He's a new leader. He goes to this rugby match, and he wears the colors of one of the rugby teams, which was an all-white rugby team. And this guy here is the major, the star rugby player on that team. And you can't see it on the back of this jersey, but he's wearing the same number as this man, number 6. And you can imagine what it took for him, having been in prison for 30 years, because he was an activist. And he's now the president, and he comes out of this whole era of this cultural shift that South Africa went through, how he had to be really resilient, understanding, empathetic, to come out into the stadium amidst tens of thousands of people and show up this way and be this leader, kind of congratulating the winner of this rugby match. And that's the kind of thing that, this Nelson Mandela is often thought of as really a transforming or alchemical kind of leader. So it's just something that, to me, represents kind of what we're talking about here. This is your VMI. This is an example of a VMI, and this is the spider graph that you get. When you get your VMI, make sure you read through the whole document and really reflect on the document and what can you learn from it. But what this basically spider map does is it takes all of your responses from the sentence completions and profiles them in comparison to tens of thousands of people who have done this, okay? And so it's using data from a huge database to try to profile your statement to that sentence prompt. And so this profile is a redefining one because a lot of the answers are in the redefining and in the space between achieving and redefining, with some being in the transforming. So this person is profiled as a redefining or living in the redefining action logic. An example with the sentence completions is, for example, when you score the sentence stems, one of the stems might have, the adeption uses about 10 different sentence stems. But in the VMI, in the sentence completion profile that was developed at the University of Washington, one of them is, if my mother, is the sentence stem that you have to complete. So if my mother were alive today, she would be proud of what her granddaughter has accomplished in her life as an artist, poet, and human being. This is scored as an achiever because there's a reference about she would be proud of what her daughter has accomplished. Achieving is the mindset. Another sentence completion is, rules are guide rails we must have in communities, but they shouldn't be so rigid that we are unwilling to take risks to challenge their effectiveness. You can see the difference there with this idea of they shouldn't be so. So they're one thing, but they shouldn't be so rigid. We should be able to test their limits. So this is the redefining action logic, where the person is dealing with a polarity. And that's how the VMI is scored. So you might want to just, you think about your VMI, and in prompt 3, just call out, or don't call this out verbally, but think about your fallback, your center of gravity, and your growing edge. Your center of gravity is how you're profiled. So that profile we just saw was a redefining profile. Your fallback is generally one action logic below or to the left of your center of gravity, and your growing edge is the one just to the right or just above your center of gravity. And the tendency in this model is to think that our work should be about trying to push ourselves into new action logics as we deal with situations in our lives. So for example, if you're on a team and you're a team lead and you just had a team meeting and your team was looking at data and you got all in a tizzy over some data that your team was looking at, and the team kind of wasn't on the same page. And you as a team lead had a hard time navigating the different points of view. One thing to think about is, how did you approach that dilemma? And how might you approach it at a different action logic? So we'll talk a little bit more about that next time we do this work. But let's just do one more prompt. And in your current work, think about a challenge you face right now. It could be a challenge with students. It could be a challenge with a team that you're on. We won't necessarily share here. I want this to be more of an inner reflection. Think of a challenge you face. How might you approach this challenge from an action logic one level up from your center of gravity? So if you're profiled as an achiever and your challenge is, I have this boy in the class who just is always getting he always is triggering me. He triggers me all the time, and I really lose it sometimes with him. How might you approach him from one level up from achiever? Maybe he triggers you because you want him to, kind of get this work done. Get this work done, Johnny. Get this work done. How would you approach him differently? So that might be an example of something to do. So think about that for a few minutes, and then I have one more thing we'll do before we close. You'll notice if you've done the VMI, one of the prompts in the unpacking is this prompt, essentially. And so some of you have already been sort of thinking about that through your VMI. When we're in the midst of challenges in our work, it's really helpful when we're, kind of when we're in the middle of that challenge, it's hard to think our way through it or think our way through it in a different way. Some of that comes when we leave the challenge and we have some time to take a deep breath and then grow from our new awareness. And so that awareness is developed by thinking about that challenge through the lens of a different mental model, a different way of thinking. And that's this idea that we're trying to develop here. So let's just end with just some sharing of just some of these ideas. I mean, it's an hour, so we've kind of we've fed through the fire hose, talking about adult development, talking about how Torbert's model of action logics comes out of this adult development model. And the VMI is a tool that gives us information about what action logic where we're operating. And then now we'll do some work thinking more about that and how we use it to gain awareness of our own leadership and how we can change that through our own inner work. So let's just open it up for some thoughts or some questions.
I think it resonated with me what Jessica was saying about being kind of that one-sided view. And because of the type of worker you are, like if you're one of the ones who are, you're an overachiever, you're constantly trying to do the best, be the best. And you look at people like, okay, why is she not working as hard as me? Why, and it's like you start comparing others, not realizing like their way of getting to success may be different than yours. It doesn't mean that yours is better or hers is better or his is better.
Yeah.
And so when she was speaking on that, that really resonated with me. And as a leader, you can't expect everyone to do what you do and how you do, because there's different ways of getting to the finish line and there's different ways of being successful. And so that's the one viewpoint I try to look through that other lens now.
Yeah.
So, it was the same way,
Yes. Yeah, Angela, that's good. That's really the point of all of this, right? That awareness that we, to move out of the socialized mind where we're comparing ourselves to others is really an important transition to go through. We're there. We've all been there. We have all been socialized. We had to socialize, right? When we were 8 years old, we wanted to socialize to a group. That middle school boy or girl wants to be a part of a group and be recognized, but there's a point at which we grow out of that, and we want to, because it's that realization you just spoke of. That was great. Thank you. If you have something on your mind that you maybe just don't want to share in the open format, just throw it in the chat. Anybody else have something, a question that maybe you have that I didn't make clear enough, something in the work we just did? Okay, let me throw on this last slide for next steps and just remind you of a couple of things. So in meeting 3, what we're going to do is we're going to do a large group debrief of the VMI. So this has been kind of a brief introduction. If you've read the article, hopefully that article fits into some of what we've been talking about. It might be helpful to do a reread if you have time. if you haven't read it, then go ahead and try to get that article read, because I think it'll give you a context for what we just did today. But be sure to read your VMI profile and take some notes, highlight it, write some reflections down. If it doesn't, some of you in the digital debrief, which I try to comment on, maybe the profile doesn't resonate with you completely. Well, write some notes about that. How do you see yourself a little differently than the way the VMI profiled you? So do that work. And then if you haven't taken the VMI, do it as soon as you can. Try to get it done in the next, like at least by Friday or Monday, so that I can also give you some feedback. And be sure to do the unpacking of results. And then there are some other options, like doing some leadership hacks that get you to do a little more thinking about aspects of your leadership. And I'll get some notifications on that, and I can read through some things and give you feedback, or you can certainly feel free to reach out to me if you want to. And then we'll meet next. The next meeting, we'll do this digital debrief. To that meeting, be sure you bring your VMI. I'm going to try to do some breakout groups in that third meeting so that we can kind of share with each other a little bit more about what we're learning about ourselves. And that's it. So any final thoughts or questions, or? And don't hesitate to send me an email if there's something we've covered today that you want more feedback on, or you want to talk more about. Just reach out to me. I'm happy to work with you. A couple people have done that already, and I'll do my best to respond and give you support along the journey that you're on. Keisha, Tanya, any closing remarks from you? No? Okay, good. All right, everybody, see you next time, and have a great week. Welcome back from vacation, and enjoy your classes or your work in departments. Good seeing y'all.